Hello. Can I see everyone here? Just checking everything is working.
It's a nice house you got
So,
there, Isabella.
Josh, let's put our to start things off. Let's start with our promo. Here it comes. Oh, well, that finished.
There's a lot of fun being on site for that. We actually strapped ourselves to that big giant foam machine. It was a lot of green screening. So
yeah. Well, that finished somewhat abruptly. I think we need to definitely tweak that little bit of the ending. I'll get Horatio. But hello and welcome to everyone who is watching us. I believe we are live, and I think I will be watching with one eye for comments as well. But we have so much to talk about. This is obviously the sort of relaunch of the Blind Spot podcast. We've done a few already, but we had a hiatus mainly because I was traveling, Josh was traveling. We're now back. We're going to do these more regularly, and there are loads of stories to catch up on. But mainly we want. Have you lost me?
No, I still got you. You're still here.
Okay, this is just my connection going a bit crazy every now and then. But I think we mainly want to talk about what's going on with Twitter. And I'm going to mute you guys whilst I'm talking. See, this is the beauty of having centralized control. The whole theme of the podcast today, I think, is focused on what is happening with Twitter. So, Josh, before I get to you, I'm just going to say Frank de Mauro is with us. He is my business partner, and he's sitting in because I think everything that's going on is also connecting into what me and Frank are trying to do to save journalism. But we'll bring him in very shortly. But let's get your take, Josh, on what have you been up to this week anyway?
Yeah, well, I've been celebrating Halloween. That's this outfit. And these glasses here I look like a pumpkin, in case you're wondering. These glasses here, these are Ocean Cleanup Project glasses. They're designers. They're made of trash from the giant Atlantic trash pile.
So, wonderful.
Yeah.
Are you being paid to say that?
Nope, just letting you know I'm a great person.
Excellent, Josh. And what is your background supposed to tell us about your mood today?
I've been doing Bitcoin and blockchain stuff some have called me a journalist. They are wrong. I did a Bitcoin podcast many years ago. And are we doing our whole resumes again? Is this as if it's like the first episode? Is that the idea?
Well, I think it's more that we've now got our little promo, so it's a soft relaunch, if that makes sense.
And now I just do Bitcoin stuff because I like to have fun. As you can tell, I live in an expensive house. Bought it with my Bitcoin monies.
Very nice, very nice. That's the value of Bitcoin right now.
That's right.
That's what it can get you.
That's right. That's what it's worth.
Well, Frank and I are right back from Web Summit, where we were this week. In the middle of Portugal, Lisbon. Is it in the middle, Frank? I don't know.
No, it's bottom.
Yeah, okay. That just tells you how poorly my geography is. Bottom-ish of Portugal.
And how was the weather in Lesbian?
It was warm and wet.
It was very nice. The mood in Web Summit was very interesting. And I did a panel, actually. I don't know if you know him, William Quigley. Do you know him? Apparently a co-founder of Tether.
Okay. I know Craig Sellers. Craig Sellers really was the driving force early on. I don't know William Quigley, but there's a lot of people involved in these that are silent.
So he was talking to me about NFTs. Actually, we were doing a panel about what not just about the art side of it or the speculative side of it, but the more utility focused opportunity in NFTs, and he's got a company called, or blockchain called Wax, and is approaching it from more of a gaming perspective. But it was in the course of prepping for that interview that he told me he was a co-founder in Tether, and I was quite surprised because I had not heard about that. And supposedly also an early investor in PayPal, which is one of the reasons he saw the potential in Tether, which I had always dubbed as sort of PayPal of Tether. So that was quite interesting. I also managed to knock my head on the scenery as I was walking out.
Sorry, I don't mean
it's
to
too
laugh.
bad he thinks there's much merit in NFTs.
Well, is that I knocked my head on the scenery? Yeah, no doubt.
Oh, that happened too. Sorry.
No, really, seriously, I drew blood. It was really bad. They had like this inverted peak, jagged edge thing to, I guess, illustrate the price of Bitcoin, maybe. And I walked straight into one of the inverted, jagged edges and hit myself.
Well, at least
here.
you didn't do it with leverage.
At least I didn't do it with leverage. That would have been much worse. And then, but the mood, Frank, the mood in Web Summit, we were having a conversation at the end of our 24-hour experience. It was for me, it was very strange. There was a sort of denial about all the economic headwinds that are coming our way. Everyone was still incredibly sort of positive minded. There was no recalibration of expectations. Isn't that right, Frank?
Yeah, it felt that way, certainly. The way they were talking positively about the future of crypto and in that specific area. But yeah, everybody seemed to be very, very positive that everything was going to be just fine.
I tend to think that they're right, but I don't think crypto's a thing. Like I think that I think that there's kind of a 2000-ish style crash coming for this industry at some point. Particularly in these like non-Bitcoin coins.
Like 100% agree.
Yeah, I don't think that there's like, you know, the idea that someone early is like, I understand why an early Tether investor would see merit in NFTs, because Tether is essentially an NFT, but that's only because we've redefined this word NFT to mean very little. So Tether leverages like the features of a blockchain such as Bitcoin to work. But it doesn't. It's not. You know. I don't think that itself is like evidence that NFTs are going to matter.
I'm having connectivity issues. Can you? Everything is fine for you guys?
Yeah, but you kind of cut out a little.
Can you hear me?
You're like doing the robot sometimes.
Yeah.
You're like this.
Yeah.
Oh dear. That's no good. So I don't know. Maybe it's my internet. I don't know. Well, if it gets worse, let me know. Wave furiously if I'm not if I'm a bit intermittent, as they say in renewable land. But let's move on, Josh, because I think everybody wants to hear about the privatization of the means of production.
Yes.
You don't like that?
Oh man. That is an academic joke if ever I've heard one. I think your listeners will like that. My listeners will be like,
okay, give me a better title.
No, that's good. I like that. I like the privatization of the memes of production is pretty funny. So we talking about Twitter? Is that what that means?
We are talking about Twitter, Josh, and I would like to know what is the latest from Twitter's new chief twit, Elon Musk.
Elon Musk is playing 12D chess right now. And I think, you know, what's interesting is I think when Elon took over, everyone in the U.S., particularly those who lean politically right of center, were very excited because there is a number of those who lean to the right of center who believe that Twitter has been targeting those people for takedown, which is true. I think that's undeniable. And yet I will talk to a lot of people who think it is not true and will tell people that they say that it's a conspiracy. So I think that's a really interesting thing going on in sort of the political dialectic. But I think people thought that Elon would go in there, fire everybody, and fix it. Instead, he's kind of gone in there and taken a different approach. I found his approach to be very interesting because what he did is he brought in leftist activist organizations and basically invited them to help figure out the rules as they should be. And the result then was that leftists took to the platform, screamed and yelled, started campaigns to have advertisers leave the platform. And so Elon Musk then used it as a predicate to do exactly what he said he was going to do and fired 50% of the employees. And so now they're down 50%, and it's and he gets to blame it on them because they lost the company a ton of money, and he said something like they're losing $4 million a day or something like that. So this move saved them something like $400 million, and I think that means that they still have $3 million more to make up, and maybe you'll have to do that with advertisers. But yeah, it was an activist sort of like move to get advertisers to leave, and there you go. You lost a bunch of jobs. Ha.
And what do you think? Do you think, are you yourself, because you have a unique vantage point here, Josh, you are actually one of the few banned from Twitter in the shadowlands of no man's land.
Yep. I was banned for
will you be paying your $8? You were banned for anti-Semitism. It was actually more that you were banned for a really bad joke, right?
Like you think it's a joke?
It was a it was a sense of humor failure, Josh. Why don't
it was
you tell
not. It was a
everyone
great joke. What do you call Israeli winemakers? Grape Jews.
Grape Jews. That's what he was banned for, by the way. So
seems a bit ridiculous that you got banned for.
It makes sense to me. That's anti-Semitism to the nth degree. So and me being of the Kanye complexion, it's not surprising. So
with having been banned, Josh, are you tempted to buy $8 worth of verification to get your way back in? Do you think you would be allowed back in? I think possibly yes.
I don't know. I mean, that joke is pretty hardcore. But if Elon finds it in his good graces to let me back in, I mean, honestly, I really do think that the $8 is worth it, and here's why. I have been saying for a long time. In fact, you probably remember this, Isabella. I think that free content and free platforms are anti-competitive. I really, truly believe that. I think that making you the product is a truly evil example of what's happened in modern capitalism. You are giving your identity for two companies to sell. And I think that that's a really despicable way to make money. So I'd like to see the end of that. And I think that $7.99 or $8 is a totally reasonable amount of money to pay to participate in something valuable. And if it's not valuable, then you can participate without paying.
I tend to agree. And I'm finding it very interesting that there is this insane reaction at the moment. It seems to me, I mean, who knows what will happen, but they're supposed to launch this product tomorrow, as far as I understand, right? Tomorrow, Tuesday.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of conspiracy theory going around that it's total chaos now at Twitter, that they're not going to be ready. It's a shambles. I feel like the mainstream media definitely wants the whole thing to fail. And there are many people kind of proclaiming they will never take out an $8 verification.
I think it's a little bit ridiculous, right? Because all of these journalists are now pretending that the blue check meant nothing to them, right? And I don't believe you. You're lying, you stupid asses. For years we had to hear about the blue checked verified users and what they're saying about Donald Trump or anything else. Or like, go screw yourself. It doesn't matter now because you have to pay $7.99. You're not mad at that. You're mad that I can be verified. Well, I am important, but like someone like, what's his name again?
Frank.
Well,
Frank. Mr. Furter can be verified.
Yeah.
Mr. Mauro. Actually, Frank hails from the Italian mafia. He's very, very happy to. No, I'm not. I'm just joking.
I apologize profusely for my slight.
That's quite all right. I won't forget. Don't worry.
I'll pay you $7.99. Not to kill me.
So we have currently got 5 people watching. So I think we should say thank you very much for joining us live. This is still relative chaos because I have genuinely been on the road nonstop for about 3 weeks. I've lost my mind. I feel like an aged pop star who doesn't know where they live anymore and
I haven't even found time to clean my kitchen since getting home.
Right. But I think it is fascinating what's going on. And you raise a really good point about journalism and that's why I've got Frank here, because we are trying to well, for a while, I guess Frank has kind of become my therapist over the last nearly 9 months as I've been trying to launch Blind Spot. He was never a expert in journalism, but he's had to work me through launching Blind Spot. And he's learned, he's basically a recovering techie and platform developer of his own right. He has already launched a whistleblower app called Haya. And that's how we ended up collaborating, because Haya, Frank was hoping that I could give Haya some promotion. And so we did a good barter exchange, I think. But Frank learned like the hard way what us independent journalists have to go through. And this is where we came up with the idea that Substack is not enough. Like, that is only one part of the story, because Substack in some ways is adding to the information chaos and confusion. And this verification business is actually the key to sorting out the problems of disinformation, not because some third party is deciding who gets to be verified or not. And this was very much our approach to solving the problem. But because if you self-identify or you then are held to account by your own standards, and that is a much better way to do it. And I have a feeling that this is where Twitter is going to end up. So a lot of the blue check marks will refuse or resist to pay, but then normal people will come along, get verified. And I see a lot of people saying on the internet that this verification doesn't really count for anything because they're not going to be doing due diligence on people. But I don't think that's true, because the act of actually,
I mean, they were like, it's like they were doing due diligence before. Come on, assholes. They really, I mean, these people, like, honestly, Isabella, these journalists, the modern journalist is the most despicable animal alive. You not among them. You are clean. You've been baptized. But like I find it really despicable that like journalism has gone from basically sort of a blue collar elitism, where it was like the blue collars in the village who know how to write, they end up like going out and doing like gumshoe type stuff, and they just happen to maybe be good writers, but they're not Harvard and Princeton and Columbia grads. It's moved into the realm of like, this is what the elitists do. They move from Harvard, Princeton, Yale, Brown, and they go work at the New York Times, and they work at all of these highfalutin magazines where they actually still are paid crap, but they're there because of like it's sort of like lawyer. You can be a lawyer, a doctor, or if you want, a journalist at the New York Times is kind of how it seems now. And I find that to be really a problem, because they are weirdly self-loathing, but also like sort of promoting of their own weird rich people elitist agendas.
Well, I tend to agree, but also what I find, the actual story of journalism in the UK, I'm not so sure about the US, is it was never an elitist profession. It was actually very working class. So in the early days,
blue collar in the US means that.
Yeah.
Okay. I never know where the euphemisms stop.
No, exactly. But I think so I guess you're right. Yeah, I was. Yeah, excuse me. I'm
saying it's turned into this institution filled with elitists, and it's very weird, because journalism isn't. It's not something elitists should do. Like it. Not that they can't do it. It's just like, it's a weird job for like people of rich children to fall into, and it's even weirder to watch what they've done with it, because it's gone from this very like. I think that journalism should be boring, right? You shouldn't be giving her a color. You shouldn't say something's blue because maybe it's cerulean, right? Like you should be as close to like no opinion as possible when you're doing journalism. It's just facts. Such and such walked over here. He did this, whatever it is. Maybe even walked is like too opinionated, moved at 2 miles an hour. But journalism should be like very objective. And we've moved it from the objective to the realm of basically mixing just opinion and objectiveness, and it's completely ruined the profession.
So exactly, and I think I'm messing about formats, which is confusing me.
One of the things, I mean, as a non-journalist and someone who consumes content.
Most
of the journalism that it comes through is opinion based. I mean, and that's how you fill in a 24-hour news cycle, is by putting in opinion. So you take a smithereen of fact, and then you pile on the opinion, and that's how you take the audience through 24 hours of whatever you need to fill in the space. And one of the issues that I can see is that it's sensationalism more than journalism now. That's the objective. And what you're talking about, journalism being a statement of bringing the facts, or sort of summarizing the facts, or getting the information and putting it in a packet that us lay people can understand, that seems to have gone away. That seems to have disappeared also because as a layperson, you don't know where can you get an accurate fact. Where do I go?
Right. And I think what's really important, Frank, and this is where it feeds into Twitter, because Josh, you already mentioned right at the beginning that there are two camps. There's the camp that recognizes that something was very wrong on Twitter in terms of like how information was being controlled and suppressed. And then there are those who think that was a conspiracy theory and that there was never any control or suppression. Now,
Cute,
I view
right?
journalism in the same way. I think there are journalists who don't see the problem. They're quite convinced that journalism is still working. There's no problem at all. And really, I don't know how, as someone on the outside,
we all have glasses on now.
Yeah, mine aren't. Oh, yeah, good. But mine aren't. Now I can see what's on your monitor. Do you really want to give that much information away, Josh?
It's the blind spot. I'm the Ray Charles of the blind spot, Isabella.
Yeah. But do you see what I mean? So I think one of the issues when you fix journalism is trying to explain to the journalists in the mainstream that there is a problem, because I think maybe 70% of the journalists who work in mainstream are not aware of there being any issue at all. And there's like 30%, maybe 25% in mainstream that recognize it, but are in no position to speak out, or to, they may be too junior, or they are not in a position in their career to rock the boat. And then there's 5% that probably have like very loud and engaged discussions with people, but they end up being either forced out or so fed up and frustrated with not being able to communicate to the rest of the journalists, aka me, that they Brexit their organizations, which is what I did, right? And it's really, it's not like a it's not
English
like,
people now use Brexit instead of just saying exit.
Well, I think Brexit is it's a double entendre. It's not just about exiting.
We were banging in the bed. We were banging in the bedroom, and I didn't like him anymore, so I sexited.
No, it's more that you feel you can't get anywhere internally, because the whole divide about Brexit was like, oh, it's better to stay in the organization to influence it, because if you're out of
it's like the difference between offer and proffer.
Yes. Okay. But we've now got nine people watching. This is really exciting.
Wow.
And I think we should ask them to ask questions. And if they do ask questions, we will maybe answer those questions. But what's really clear to me is that there hasn't been any shift in that understanding. The whole Twitter thing has come about, and you would think this would be the moment that some journalists are sort of starting to reflect on what's really going on, but they're doubling down as far as I can see. What do you think, Josh?
Yeah, well, no, I mean, like, I think Isabella, that journalism has kind of been killed by access to real-time sources. So, for example, I don't need CNN anymore to tell me what's going on in protests. I can literally go watch 16 or 17 streams of different parts of the protest and get a complete understanding of what's going on in any given area. So like when they go on and the BLM protests are happening and they call it a mostly peaceful protest, or mostly peaceful but fiery protest, I think was the famous one, where the police station was burning in the background. And he goes, it's been mostly peaceful but fiery. And so... But you see, fiery but mostly peaceful protest. That's what it said. So this is I can go get a complete view of exactly what's happening on the ground. And journalists, I don't think, have figured out that we can do that. So that's happening. But number two, I think that part of being the other journalist, the one who doesn't understand what's going on, truly is someone who does not know what's going on. They truly think that they are articulating reality, and they're not. And that's really weird. I mean, like, I go into these rooms in places like Clubhouse or whatever, and I argue with people all day long who will tell me that, like, politicians said things that they didn't say. The Trump era was replete with this, right? Everyone thinks that Trump told everyone to drink bleach. He didn't. Didn't say the word bleach at all. And I swear, like, when I say that to people, they go, I remember it. I heard him say it. But then you play the clip for them and they're kind of dumbfounded. And either one of two things happens. Either they admit that they were wrong, or they change their claim and go, well, it was close enough. Which it isn't.
Well,
it's not even similar.
Well,
this sort of echoing of effectively sound bites without context and or rumors, because that's what it becomes. It becomes a game of Chinese whispers, essentially, because no one has the time to do the work themselves.
Chinophobic.
Sorry, but nobody has the time to do the research themselves, and so they rely on the last person who's told them that fact. And before you know it, the whole thing has been distorted to the point of it becoming potentially disinformation in its own right. But this is not just a Trump phenomenon or a left-wing phenomenon. My argument is that it's happening across the board. And journalists across the board it's like the blind leading the blind. And so we are creating a complete false ecosystem of everything. And the only way to really tackle that is not through third-party fact checkers or any top-down authority, because that is just a competition of varying truths, and you are never going to bridge the varying sort of perspectives with that mindset. It has to be bottom up, and it has to be based around the market, determining determining through experience and through your reporting, and by developing a trust in you as a source over time. And there's no other way around it, I don't think. That has to come back into the market. And if you as a journalist openly declare your values and what you're about and how people can hold you to account, that is the key thing. And I don't think most journalists do that, mainly because the neutral guys, or the guys who are supposed to be neutral, don't really realize they're not being neutral. So it's this war of different realities, right?
I sort of agree. But here's the thing. Yeah. So here's the thing. The purpose of journalism is, in my opinion, really to establish history, right? You're writing things out, somewhat it matters a little bit that I know what's going on today, but really what it matters for is the future. When someone's going back and analyzing what's happening, right? They're going to go back, they're going to look at all the journalists who had different perspectives and read what they said and put together, hopefully, a more complete picture of what occurred, right? So, when I read someone like Gordon Wood or something like that, I'm reading books that he's taken like primary sources, he's read through them, he's looked at maybe the texts of like Benjamin Franklin, and he's constructing a picture of a person that maybe is a little bit different than what we tend to think of in a historical context. The stories that you get when you're in kindergarten or first grade, these are very different than maybe the contextual clues that he's giving you. Or that like you get when you actually read, Benjamin Franklin's writings or something. Maybe you find that he's actually not this confident man. Maybe he's a little bit of a whiny little girly boy. I don't know. Like I don't know. You see something different when you look at these primary sources, or when you go back and look at journalist accounts of things, right? I think what's going on right now is journalists believe that they're in charge of the historical narrative, and they believe that they can define history now rather than allowing the future to define it based on what's occurred and what happened. And so, like, right now what's happening in journalism isn't journalism. It's a war of like historical truth. And they're trying to establish the I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say that. Historical record. They're trying to establish a historical record in real time. And I think the problem with that is you literally can't look at context without like the soft glasses that time gives you when you look back on history. Like you look back on it, you're like, oh, interesting. They really thought this thing was a significant event. but it wasn't. And this thing here was like, important, but it wasn't. Or this thing was little reported on, but it ended up being like the most important thing that ever happened. And you can't do that in real time. It's impossible.
Exactly. Go on, Frank.
Sorry to intervene on this one, because there's different aspects of journalism that we need to look at, because there is the current events, things happening in real time that need to be reported, and things that are instead in-depth studies, which are the sort of journalistic analysis of a long-standing case, or something that's been developing over a long period of time. And if I go back, because I was living in Egypt during the first revolution. You remember when Mubarak was ousted? I was actually living over there, and I found myself that
Did you do it, Frank? Did you start that thing?
My brother-in-law did.
Is he selling fruit at a fruit stand? Is that?
It kind of was.
Yeah,
that was Morocco. But anyway, I remember then I was actually because the Twitter was, mad with everybody reporting and live streaming, and so there was so much information out there that you try to go to a source. And obviously I was going to the BBC and the CNN, and I found myself in the end I had to switch to Fox News, because it was the true. I know what I'm saying, but because
Isabella,
they had no obvious interest or whatever. They were literally just reporting the facts, and I knew that they were the facts because, as I said, I was there, and I was very surprised that I was like, "Why is Fox? I mean, this is Fox News."
I think you're articulating something very interesting. So Fox has been doing that ever since Trump. Weirdly, they've moved to like a much more centrist sort of reporting. But I think the observation you're making is also something that our foes, America's foes in particular, have noticed. So if you'll notice, RT tends to report actual facts about what's going on in places like the US. They do exactly what I was saying. They're going to primary sources and they're reporting on like what's happening on the ground. So what's occurred as a result of this is those who are not in the matrix, they end up turning on sources like RT. They don't know a lot about like actual disinformation, actual like state-sponsored disinformation. So RT has built a level of trust with a lot of Americans, particularly those on the right. And what's occurred is that like during moments like the Russian-Ukraine war, all of a sudden they deploy full-on Russian propaganda during these times, mixed in with like actually good reporting on the ground. And it's a really interesting tactic because like they can do this, they can build up basically cultural equity over the course of many years, and then they dump on you, and you don't know suddenly exactly. But they burn it with a group of people that may not figure out that they burned it for 5-10 years.
It's the long game, is what you're saying.
Correct. It's really interesting. It's super. We do. I mean, we kind of probably do that with like Radio Free America or whatever, right? But
I was going to say, because the comparison there is Radio Free Europe, because or just the BBC as a foreign correspondent, or Reuters. When Reuters, I was trained by Reuters, and certainly that was, that foreign correspondent tone is about one side that said this and the other side said that. And I did do a kind of joke coverage of January. I did a joke piece about, one shouldn't joke about January 6th, but I did write. I wrote it in the guise of a sort of foreign correspondent, and if you do it in that sort of very objective way, you realize that it is entirely skewed by the two different warring factions. And Joseph Cottrell, my former colleague at the FT, had a great account of like covering affairs in Britain from the eyes of a foreign correspondent. And you realize it's very much like, the opposition, loyalists said, because once you apply that language that we're used to applying to, emerging markets or whatever, you realize that actually we're not in the game of truth here domestically at all. So that is a very interesting observation. And Radio Free Europe, I think, was exactly the same. And then it obviously became an outright propaganda mouthpiece. It actually just hit me today that GB News is probably our equivalent of RT, because one would have, obviously in the last 10 years, almost every country has developed these national broadcasting entities, whether it's RT, I think France has one, India has Wyong News.
Al Jazeera.
Al Jazeera.
Al Jazeera, yes. XBBC.
So every country has its own sort of national broadcaster, and I always thought, well, the BBC is our one, but I've started to think that maybe that isn't the UK equivalent. The UK equivalent might actually be GB News, but
you see the problem that we're having here, and we're listing so many different sources of news, and how is somebody supposed to? Because at the end of the day, as a normal consumer of news or journalism, unless you've got the time to jump around and realize and see, okay, today Fox News is actually telling facts rather than the opinion of BBC, or you jump over. How how's a normal person supposed to navigate this? The only option is you attach yourself to one stream and you become militantly a follower of that stream. And that's where I think the problem lies, not just in the whole world, because then people become militant about saying, well, I'm going to stick to Tucker Carlson on Fox News, and that's it. He's my truth teller. I don't have time to go and investigate the different things.
It is interesting that people do tend to pick oracles. You know what else I've noticed though about journalists themselves is I have just observed that journalists become radicalized by their own beats. Have you seen this, Isabella?
Oh, 100%. 100%. There are so many problems in journalism that I could talk to you about, but yes, it's called going native.
The beat is the radicalizing feature in journalism, and the reason is because, like, let's say you're doing like your beat is white supremacists, right? That means you're gonna like talk to every single white supremacist in America, and to you the problem is gonna look really, really big, really big. And then what's going to happen is you're going to tell your journalist friends about how big the problem is. You're in debates, you're going to say, like, this is my journalistic beat. I know more about this than everybody. It's a really big problem. And like really big problem to you might mean something different than it does to like the rest of society. And it's a complete and perfect focus.
I think you're right to a certain degree, but I think you would never get like a white supremacist beat in any mainstream news.
There is Vice. Vice News has one.
Really? Okay. Well, that's super niche. I think mostly beats are sort of sector specific or, geographically, allocated.
Vice has a journalist whose job is to document the rise of radical white nationalism.
Well, yes. In that sort of situation, you start it's called selective bias. So you start looking for the problem that you've prejudged exists, and then everything is confirmation bias from then on. But the bigger problem is just going native as well in your own topic, because you develop very close contacts with the people you're covering. You're supposed to be impartial. Those contacts, once you've been in a beat, it's a paradox, because you need to. If you're too fresh, you get exploited and manipulated by people because you don't really know what you're talking about. But you can be objective because everything is essentially, everyone is a stranger to you. But if you're too long in the beat, you become native, and these people are your friends, and so you tend to want to cover for them if you find something out that it's called like the too good to report. Like, so you get stories and you're like, oh, I can use this as leverage almost to get other stories. So you hold stuff back because it's kind of currency in your information. We all trade information, and it's like, well, you told me this, it's a bit, I could use it, but I won't use it because it's really damaging, but you've got to give me access about other stuff. So then you end up in the access world, and that really is where a lot of the unwitting corruption comes into journalism. And it was always that way. And so I think generally there's a sweet spot in the career path of a journalist when they're not too fresh, but they've not been in a beat too long. It's like maybe after 2-3 years, the perfect amount of time. And that's when you get really good reporting on any specific beat. So always look for someone who is 2 to 3 years in their beat, and I think that is probably when you get the best reporting out of that person. But yeah, I think you're right in terms of if there are increasingly niche topics that you are generating as a sector in and of themselves because you think it's going to generate clicks, that is also going to be a form of selective and confirmation bias. I agree. I never knew that Vice had that classification. That's amazing.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, that's the thing, though. Like, a lot of these modern journalists are doing that. Like, Vice had a guy for a while that was going around the world and trying different drugs. Like, that was his beat. And I find that, like, a lot of that stuff is very interesting. But when I hear the reports by these journalists, particularly in some of these more, like, politically charged beats, they become radicalized. They truly believe everything is indicative of the thing that they're looking at in front of their face. But the other thing is they just become radicalized. It's very interesting. And I'd never seen that before in journalism, where they literally become radicalized in their beat. And it's just weird.
And doesn't that then transpire into the person absorbing that information? Because obviously
it does, but what's stranger is that there's a number of things that, like, one of the things that's happened in journalism that's really problematic is the realization of those organizations that have viewed themselves as legitimate, or that the news has always viewed as legitimate sources, having a self-awareness about this. It's sort of like a conscious reawakening for these organizations, where they're like, hey, we are viewed as a legitimate source for information, so we can tell these journalists anything we want, and they'll repeat it breathlessly as if it's simply true. And so, like, in America, probably the biggest example of this would be like the SPLC. They've realized that they became a great source of info for journalists, and what they've done now is they've made this radicalization heat map, and they're just like labeling everyone from like evangelical churches to like actual Nazi groups on this heat map. And so you'll see these journalists repeat their heat map, and they'll say, well, such and such church is a radical white nationalist organization who hates gays. And the sourcing is SPLC, right? So they kind of have this like objective where they can basically just go after any organization they want, and it'll be repeated breathlessly in the media. And I've realized this about like a lot of these like sort of source organizations that previously were good sources. They're burning their reputations.
But isn't that's exactly one of the things that we were discussing with Isabella, of a way to fix this journalism, is because when you, as the recipient of this information, may that be through TV or reading something, there's very little ways of you to verify what they're saying is a fact source and where that comes from, and going back the steps, because you do get this stepping down, passing down of this is a fact, someone then repeats it, and you take it for granted that when you're reading your piece, that what you're reading is a fact, but there is no way for you to trace it back to its origin, so then you can make up your own opinion. Well, actually, no, this is not a fact. This is somebody else with an agenda who's pushed this as a fact. And this is one of the, I think, crucial parts of what we need to try and fix, is so that the end consumer of the product, which is produced by the journalist, is able to determine somehow where this information comes from. Can I verify this? And that's the hard part.
It's hard because a lot of these things are ambiguous, and it's an anthropological quandary. It's not necessarily left or right or black and white. Some of these issues are spectrum based. It's like, whether, maybe we won't go into some of the more complex ones, but or controversial ones, but I'm trying to think of something less controversial. It's all a matter of perspective. Well, the one that comes to mind is the election. That's the first one in my mind, right? It is honorable in many ways. If you are convinced there's been a fraud, right, you are naturally not going to be reassured by journalists from the other side telling you that there hasn't been a fraud. So it doesn't really matter like how many times they tell you this is fact, right? Because there is,
you're not going to believe them.
You're not going to believe them, because the definition of how the electoral kind of system has been devised, if you've been convinced that the whole thing has been hacked and everyone is corrupt and it goes all the way up to the judiciary, right, then you're never going to be convinced, even if it's...
Isabella, let me ask you this: as a former journalist, I've heard this numerous times from CNN and the others. They first of all they call the election question the big lie, right? Number one. But then they say the reason they know that is because, quote, there is no evidence presented to date of large-scale voter fraud. How often in journalism is the journalist who says, like, you were part of the Wirecard thing, right? How many people were telling you that there was no evidence that Wirecard was a fraud?
Well, exactly. And that's why I am fairly, shell-shocked by that experience, because
I was sad you didn't appear in the Netflix documentary, by the way.
Did I appear in it? No, not
no,
me.
you didn't. No.
No,
I was sad.
no. I was only on the periphery. I was in the periphery. But it is an example. It's a great example of how, there are conspiracies occasionally that go all the way to the top. In the case of Wirecard, it went all the way to the highest points of the German government, right? So the in a kind of complicit, in some ways sometimes unwittingly complicit, but there was a sort of institutional banding around Wirecard and trying to sort of enforce their messaging, and anything that was coming from the FT was seen as, oh, well, that's the Anglo anti-German perspective, you can't trust it, blah blah blah. Am I cutting out?
No, you're
fine.
You're flashing a bit.
Your face is frozen.
Okay, so okay, I'm frozen, but you can hear me. That's what matters.
Yeah, we hear you fine.
So yeah, I think that's exactly right. So I think this attitude of third-party fact-checking is the wrong way to go about it, because you're never going to convince anyone unless incredibly diverse committee, and even then it would take, if to do it properly, the labor intensity of doing the fact checking would be so high, it would be incredibly costly.
But Isabella, another question. Let's say you were a journalist and you were researching whether there was election fraud in the US in the last election, and you found a smoking gun. Okay. In previous, like with Wirecard, for example, there was a point where everyone was like, oh, wow, they were right. Oh, wow. Okay. But I think I would assert that with like the election, because they've so entrenched themselves into this narrative that it absolutely is a lie, evidence being there is no evidence yet, they would not report or believe someone who presented actual evidence. And then the second part of that is, I think what's really interesting about it is there's a defined time during which you're allowed to discuss. So, for example, you're allowed to talk about the casting of votes as not fraudulent or fraudulent, but you are not allowed to talk about the media's behavior in the lead up to the election and whether that caused the election to switch one way or the other, and whether that itself constitutes fraud. I found this whole thing very interesting with regard to like the rails that are put on the conversation and how it is that you're allowed to discuss the the voting stuff in the United States.
Well, but the thing that really
and I've never seen that before. That's really what I'm saying. I've never seen that before.
And what made me very uncomfortable with the reporting around that was the immediate, like within 24 hours of the election. So before anyone had any chance to do any investigation into these assertions, right? There was kind of a choir of commentary from the media in unison saying any accusation of voter fraud is baseless. The term was repeatedly used, like baseless. And I don't know. I'm not in a position of any authority here. I am neutral. I don't take one perspective over the other on this at all. I kind of think it's unknowable in some ways. In terms of like how much, I'm sure some fraud occurred. I don't know how much is relevant. I'm not an expert here. But what I do think is interesting is that the baseless term was rolled out in such vigor. And that to me was very unnatural and within the time period, not logical. And that was the issue I had with it. But I think it's better to steer away from that topic and look at a closer, like an example that occurred more recently, which is the great sort of GBP sell-off and the role that was played by the media in that. Because I think that have I done a little banner? I'm kind of learning how this system works. Actually, before we do that, do you want to hear some reader comments?
Yeah.
Because we've got a few.
But also Isabel, I'm going to send you an article. I think in the wake of what we were just talking about, it's important to at least hit on the DHS leaks from this week.
Oh yes, you were going to talk about that, right? Yes. So let's do
now.
that. I've read it. I've now read it. I've read the Truth Cops, right? That's the one.
Mm-hmm. What did you think of it?
Well, I mean, I'm not surprised. I kind of, I'm very cynical about most things, so I'm not really that surprised. What surprised you about it?
Well, I wonder what.
Why don't you tell?
In some ways, I wonder what the English perspective is, because, like, in America, free speech meant something very specific my whole life, and only recently has it begun to mean this other thing, which is that free speech is somehow restricted speech. It used to be when you were on the playground, you could call someone a name and they go, "You can't say that. That hurts my feelings." And the other could go, "This is America, free speech. I can say anything I want." That's like an insult kids would give each other. It's America. So, I mean, like, literally in America, you've always been able to say basically anything you want, as long as it's not really libelous or defamatory and, like, causing injury to the other party. But we've moved into a world where, like, a vast segment of the population believes that we should restrict speech. And and it's clear that now that mentality has entered into the government and has begun actually being implemented by probably both parties who want to do this. So it's interesting here, because this is really a giant restriction of an American ideal. And it's free speech itself is an ideal that really only exists in the United States. No one else has ever done this.
No, you're right. But why don't you tell viewers the gist of the article, and Frank, who hasn't read it?
Yeah. So what's basically happened is the DHS has formed a partnership with all of the social medias, and them, and I think the FBI as well, are able to go on and basically request that people and subjects get removed that they deem misinformation. And they can do this on the fly. They don't have to provide reasoning. And by the way, with regard to the possibility of the election being stolen, it names the agent who went to these places and basically told them that the Hunter Biden laptop story was Russian misinformation, right? Definitively. Right. And this is right after they also gave them warning saying that they need to be aware that Russian misinformation is going to come and try to influence the election. So, I mean, since then, we've discovered that it was not Russian misinformation, but that was pretty confirmable even as they were saying it. But the socials started taking it down, and the polls show that it would have had a profound influence on the outcome of the election. Something like 10 to 15% of people say that they might have changed their vote if they had known about the Hunter Biden laptop stuff, which means that Biden would have had no chance. So at the very least, like, it's very difficult to say that they weren't election meddling, and that their election meddling didn't result in a different result in the election, which sounds to me like a stolen election. But when I've tried this discussion point, I've been told that it doesn't matter because the votes are the only part of the election that you can discuss as being stolen or fraudulent. So it seems like it doesn't resonate, and it's kind of interesting to me that that's the case.
So let me get this right. So now, if you put something on Twitter or social media in general, which is deemed misinformation because you might state something, is opinion misinformation?
They can categorize anything. During COVID, we saw that a lot of opinion can be deemed misinformation.
This is okay, but this is what I find.
I think
so
this is
sad state of affairs. Is that if they're going after the social media companies where, the person using social media, it's not a news source. Twitter is not a news source.
Correct. Well, and also news can say anything they want to. They have freedom of speech as well. Yeah. Like, I view this, Frank, as honestly, this leak, in my opinion, is more important than the Snowden leaks. And the reason it's more important is because the Snowden leaks are violations of maybe my right to privacy, which, you know, some sort of privacy rights, right? There's some violation of my rights. Maybe the right to seizure, unreasonable search and seizure, stuff like that. There's a total explanation of why this might violate my rights. But the Snowden leaks are sort of like tangential violations. They probably don't affect me. I don't like them because it's wrong, but I'm probably never going to end up being affected by it. But when the government starts restricting speech and the effects of it actually are, I get banned from Twitter, or people I know have been banned from Twitter, or not just banning from Twitter, like they're essentially removed from the ability to discuss things, right? They're removed from the global conversation. That is a much more evil and insidious actual effect. It's got knock-on effects that actually have affected me in ways that I have seen and experienced. It's a much more insidious kind of governmental problem.
This is the other bit that I find astounding, from what I am understanding, is that if you put yourself forward as a comedian and you put forward some information, what they deem misinformation, but you put it in as a joke, that technically is not misinformation, because you are putting it as a comedic, in a comedic point of view. So where's the line going to be drawn? And this is
there
where
is no line. I think this is the issue, Frank. The fact is that we are creating a system which is what we in the old democratic liberal West would usually look upon if it was happening in a different country. We would be like, this is an abomination of
listen,
human rights.
I have a home in Egypt, and we vacate in Egypt a lot, and it's normal practice. Middle East is a normal practice. I don't, as I know from personal experience, you put something on social media in the Middle East that is not agreeable or whatever, an opinion. That's it. You don't just get your opinion taken away. You get taken away. And we're outraged about that. And yet, from what you're describing,
the irony, Frank, is that we're still being outraged by those things happening abroad. That's the thing that absolutely gets me. It's the hypocrisy of like when you do see the mainstream sort of getting up in arms about freedom of speech in Iran or wherever, but they seem to, like Josh alluded to in the beginning, be in a kind of denial about it happening domestically, even though we are now being faced with clear-cut sort of leaks that are proving that we are edging further and further away from free speech domestically. But there are two other key points here that I want to discuss. One of them is the recent banning of David Icke in the Netherlands. I don't know, Josh, if you know that.
David Icke was banned?
What?
I don't know. I like him.
He's been banned.
I love lizard people.
Oh, well, you don't discriminate against them. That's very nice of you. But before we do that,
George Bush is great. I like them all.
I wanted to do some reader comments. Here's one from someone called Andrew Brown, who I have no idea who he is. Even when the news is delivered in a neutral,
you're frozen.
Neutral manner. The biased narrative can be set by covering 10 stories on the same topic, and thus actively being the excluding other news that conflicts. I don't know what the last part of that sentence means.
He's gone on. The problem appears to be the collective hive mind bias of journalists themselves. Thus, how do you break the groupthink hiring problem? So there you go. That's one comment. Andrew Brown obviously likes to use the word bus a lot. Here's another comment. Access to source is a big leverage on journalists. Some reporters who cover the Fed are averse to covering criticism on central bank policies because doing too much of that would close off access. And I agree. I think that is exactly right.
I like this macro by Kexelius. That's a Pepe reference.
Oh, no. You see, it must be one of your fans. Relationship management is a two-way street. Journalism to serve the public, but to do so, you have to serve the interests of institutions that can gatekeep journalists. Exactly. Let's see what else we've got.
Are they paying us for these comments? I hope they are.
No, not yet. But I thought it'd be nice just in case one day they do decide. Here's another one from your
That's
mate.
I was gonna. Yeah, that's a good one. Sorry, I saw that. Yeah,
You can read it, therefore.
Yeah,
Go
great.
on.
Let the dyslexic read the comment. I generally think it's up to the individual to use one's own life experience knowledge to discern various narratives in media. To a knowledgeable audience, there is little need of fact checked, and absolutely right. Except that we need to cover not just a knowledgeable audience, but the unknowledgeable audience, because that's the spectrum of our society. And this is, and the fundamental problem is not with the knowledgeable audience, because as Macro said, knowledgeable audience can do its own their own fact checking.
That's right.
It's the people that don't have the time to get knowledgeable that then have to rely on a source. And here comes in the trust into the media. And that's where the problem lies today, because there's this fighting between the media to become the trusted source. And then the individual reading the news then attaches themselves to one trust. And the problem is that because there is such bickering and slagging off between the media companies, that you don't really want to listen to an alternative view, because by your trusted source, you've been told that, CNN are a bunch of liars. That's Fox News telling you that, and CNN telling you that Fox News are a bunch of liars, and so on and so forth. And the same with the BBC here, and
it's a form of othering, and it's either us or them, and that's what drives me nuts. Super chats are not on. Ooh. They're not on because we don't have 1,000 subscribers yet. But when we do, hopefully they will be on.
Then you can pay us.
You can pay us to take your comments. And Macro by Kexelia says,
well, I guess your Keck word is not
actually
Pepe.
a Kaminska fan. It must be old Macro, who I think I recognize if it's Macro. So hello, thank you for joining us today. But let's go on to the two other topics to get in here. Though. Should David Icke, and excuse the typing noise, should David Icke be banned? I think this is an amazing situation. So for those of you who don't know, David Icke has been banned entry into the Netherlands. And because the Netherlands is in Schengen zone, that means he's essentially been banned into all of Europe. And there is no, as far as I can see.
Doesn't he live in Europe?
He lives in the UK. I think he lives in maybe Essex. One of the Channel Islands. Does he? Oh, he's a mate. Yeah. But anyway, what is amazing?
You have a city named Essex.
Essex. Potato.
Essex, Wessex, Sussex. It's the X's. But when I was trying to decipher why he's been banned, there's no clarity. Like none of the reports really explain what he's done suddenly that is justifiable of a ban. They've all kind of just said, oh, he's seen as a dangerous threat or dangerous voice.
He's gonna sweatpan all over us,
right? And this is extraordinary because David Icke has been on the scene since 1991, really, like that famous Wogan interview that he did in the turquoise outfit when he just decided he was the Messiah. I don't know. He's never been in the sort of serious realm. And actually in the early days of Netflix, I don't know, Josh, if this was the case in American Netflix, but in the UK, when Netflix was starting out, they only had like an inventory of about 12 bits of 12 documentaries. And one of those for about 2 years was the David Icke presentation.
Are you talking about for streaming? Did you guys not get Netflix? Did you not get Netflix in the UK until they started streaming?
We did.
No, we didn't have the CD. We didn't have the DVDs.
Oh, okay. I was like, when they started out, they had thousands of DVDs. I still have my DVD subscription, by the way, Isabella.
No, we had streaming, and it around 2013, 2014, 2012, around then. There were only like 13 shows on it. It was like limited amount of content. And one of those was the David Icke thing. And I always wondered to myself, why is Netflix showing David Icke? That's like a bit radical for like this.
That was the cheapest thing they could buy.
Because it's the cheapest thing they could buy. But it shows us the difference between 2013 and today. Like, could you imagine Netflix?
Isabella, real quick. Tangent. Right now, there's a basketball player named Kyrie Irving. They say it's Kyrie. I'd never heard of him until this week, and I don't know how you don't read his name Kyrie. It's clearly a Latin name. So Kyrie Irving. He said that he watched a movie called Hebrews to Negroes, and that it was very interesting. And then he provided a link, and it's on Amazon.com. They're hosting it, but he's now being accused of anti-Semitism because he posted a link to a video that Amazon is hosting. And it's interesting to me that Amazon gets no blowback. And it's the same kind of thing. Like, Netflix can post videos of these people, and I don't know what the source of this is, but the host of the content doesn't get any blowback, but people that watch it do. And in this case, David Icke, he's been mainstream for many years. Everyone views him as a kind of a crazy. That he has a few, like 2% of the population that reads him very seriously and believes in lizard people. And the rest of everyone else is like, I got to read about lizard people. This is very funny. And somehow the companies that have propped him up and hosted him are totally fine. They're not dangerous, but David Icke himself is dangerous somehow. And it's all of a sudden, like, I don't understand this. It's weird.
Really weird.
Well, it's not that weird, because if you think about it, the hosting companies have a lot more legal representation than David Icke does. So
yeah, but why,
you're not going to target Amazon. You're not going to target Netflix.
Is the cultural blowback not in any way organic? Is it truly completely lobbied? Because if that's the case, we have a bigger problem.
Oh God, yeah, they're completely lobbied. I mean, I find it, hosting, my issue, everyone's like, about the internet and all the issues with, ranging from hate speech, pedophilia, and all these things and everything. And I said, well, why don't you just target the hosting companies? Because that's where the source is. And the reason you don't is because they have the lobbying power to say, don't touch us. We're not responsible for that content. I had a big rant about this, about end-to-end encryption. It's, again, the same principle. End-to-end encryption is a load of, excuse the term, bollocks, because it's just there to protect the hosting companies, may that be the Facebook with WhatsApp or Signal or other companies, for them to just raise their hand saying, we don't know what's on our systems, we don't control it. So it's the same principle. The target, it's easier to go after David Icke than it is to go after Netflix for hosting.
Why? My question is, why do we have a populace that in every country, why are humans so willing to move on that narrative rather than like how are we, like, it blows my mind that every week the news comes up on Monday and goes, the issue that you're going to care about this week is net neutrality. And all of America's like, yeah, net neutrality, very important issue. And then like the next week, the issue you're going to care about this week is police brutality. And everyone's like, yeah. And they forget, like, what about net neutrality? Oh, no, that was last week's issue. Like, this week is police brutality. And like every single week we get a different issue that we have to care about, and everyone follows. And it really weirds me out, particularly with like the Kyrie Irving stuff and the Kanye West stuff. Like, maybe they said some really reprehensible things. I just can't imagine caring. But everybody moves from thing to thing and like will just repeat it breathlessly and be very angry.
Speaking of which, I think it's because we've been going for an hour. I think we should aim to finish in about 20 minutes or so, because Frank is an early night type person. This is life in Kent, in London,
like
near London. It's out there. But I think this is a really good pivot point into what happened with Truss and in the and generally the British pound, because so much of that was to do with the hysterical overreaction of not just
I'll be right
the market.
back. I can hear you still. Just letting you know.
Okay. Go sort out your dishwasher and your dirty dishes.
I will.
So basically what happened with Truss, in my mind, was only partially to do with the mini budget. I think the there had been a legacy situation in the UK anyway, where we were coming into a economically challenging time no matter what. So I've compared it to the proposition of the herd immunity plan when we were facing COVID. Again, it's not that it was a great option. Neither herd immunity or the mini budget were optimal. Like, they were both pretty crappy options. But the media framed it as if the alternatives were somehow inordinately better as options, when really, in both scenarios, we're facing crappy options on both sides. There's just a difference in terms of how the risk is managed. So in both cases, herd immunity and the mini budget, I would argue it's about putting short-term, taking a bit of short-term risk for long-term gain, whereas the alternative is being overly, protective and safe in the early phase, but at the risk of making things worse in the longer term. That's how I would frame it. But this debate was not allowed. As soon as the trust budget was announced, the media went into pack mode, and it was this constant repetition of, well, the pound is collapsing and blah blah blah. We're a banana, republic. By the way, we're not a banana republic. I mean, we're not necessarily the most we're not in the best economic position, but by any stretch, I wouldn't suggest we are. But to compare us to a banana republic is really quite absurd. We are a sovereign that borrows still in our own currency. We are still, we've got the legacy infrastructure of 100 years worth or more, like 200 years worth of industrial development. We have education. We have English. We are about as developed as you can get in the West. To suggest that we are somehow on the cusp of complete implosion relative to Europe or any other Western state, that we are worse off, I think is a really poor analogy. But you wouldn't have known that because the media reaction only had one story, and that was that the Trust Brigade were a bunch of morons and we had to get them out at any cost. And the Bank of England's role in the whole thing was completely overlooked, even though arguably quantitative tightening was the real trigger for the sell-off in the pound, right? So what I was frustrated about in terms of how the media coverage, transpired, is that the other point of view was just not allowed. It was considered completely controversial.
But don't you think that the reason that happened is because what we were talking about there is very complex subject. So for a media to stay relevant with their audience and get the absorption, get the viewership that they need, they can't go into these explanations and try to explain this because it is a complicated matter. So it's a lot easier just to turn around and say Liz Truss and her brigade are morons and they are causing the destruction of England, because that is the headline, that is a strapline that you can tweet about and someone can just read it, understand it and follow it, and then click through to your BBC website or your Sky News or whatever. And that for me goes back to what we were saying originally, which is the problem of for the general public to get a trusted source. So if we go back to the days of I'm a big fan of Edward R. Mauro, all for he stood for and what he did during the McCarthy eras and all that. There was a person with the whole team that the public knew that you only had to say it's a bad thing, and people would say, okay, well, I trust him because he had credibility, he had integrity, and that was known to the public. And Josh, you know better than this. In America, me and my names sometimes I go. Famous anchor, did announce the death of Kennedy. Come on.
Are you talking about the murderer? The guy?
No, the news anchor, the famous news anchor that America had. Oh, crikey!
I'm not an American. I don't know.
I do know, but I don't what the name is. It's so stupid.
Oh
It's so
my God.
it's so obvious. But
Walter
it wasn't.
Cronkite. There we
Yes,
go.
correct. Cronkite wasn't Murrow. I mean, to the point though, wasn't Murrow heavily involved in Project Mockingbird?
I don't know, actually.
I believe he was, and so like
I don't know.
But that's
Sorry.
the same with Woodward and Bernstein. Didn't like
yeah,
one of them,
yes,
Woodward
but
ended up.
the thing is like I think it's interesting that like he's the guy you cite as trustworthy, because if I'm right and he was heavily involved in Mockingbird, trustworthiness is the opposite thing that you should give him. Like it and
It can be that I'm not aware of this.
it's just really interesting. Like American journalism was co-opted by the intelligence agencies for at least a short time, particularly in the 70s and 60s, I believe, and it's pretty well documented. And I honestly don't think that has changed greatly. I think the intelligence agencies probably are still embedded in news organizations in a heavy way, differently than maybe they were during Mockingbird. But I don't see how we can get around that discussion. I just can't believe it's not true.
Okay, so in that case, it would make sense that the area where the intelligence agencies don't have a control, which is the social media streaming, the only way for them to control it is to implement this, what you showed us earlier, the system of saying any misinformation, just like the Chinese do, any misinformation that doesn't agree,
I don't think
we shut it down.
I don't think it's. You see, my view is actually that there are all sorts of state actors involved on social media, and that happened from the very early days. Certainly at the FT, in the early days, whenever we talked about, I was there, remember, from 2008, and whenever we talked about China in any shape or form, you would immediately get these obvious trolls like in the comments, and they were clearly paid agents, because it was the kind of, they were inauthentic comments, you know, not like our comments here, of course, which are all authentic, apart from those from early on from Andrew Brown. But
I'm gonna look into the Murrow stuff, by the way, because I'm curious now. I thought that he was.
No, I'm
maybe
curious
he
too.
wasn't.
No, please do. No, please do, Joshua, and let me know, because
it's worth investigating, because you know, I actually have no idea. But in terms of social media, I think very early on, the Chinese were very much into it, and they were influencing things through the comment space. And as a journalist in those days, it was very notable, because in all your other stories, there was remember, early days, maybe you'd get 2 comments if you were lucky, 3 comments on an article. Very rarely you'd get this stream of like 500 comments, right? But the Chinese articles would immediately have 10 relatively similar comments, sort of telling you why you're wrong and why China is great. And it became, you know, this was the 50 Cent army. We didn't know it at the time. But then over time, when we started figuring it out and the other commenters started figuring it out, they would then push back against them. There was dialogue, and they'd be like, oh, you're just from the 50 Cent brigade. And it started to sort of self-regulate. And then the Chinese commenters, I think, shift tactics, and they became far more, it became clear that they had to use more sophisticated means to influence the commentary. And I think this is the point where you get the bot farms, where you get behind the scenes bribing of journalists. I know in the early, like maybe 2010, I would get emails from corporates sort of asking me if I could tweet about some, you know, inadvertently say something about X brand or whatever in exchange for a few bob here and there. And of course, because journalists don't earn very much money, they're highly corruptible. Now, I thought it was hilarious, and I would share these emails and go, look what's happening, right? But how many people wouldn't share those emails? How many people would actually take up these corporates on these offers? It's impossible to tell, because the relationships are entirely bilateral, and it's not just corporate corruption. I wouldn't be surprised at all if state actors or third parties were infiltrating and getting certain voices to say certain things that match their agenda. But I think
Isabella,
what's really interesting is also what's happening internally at Twitter, because there's been a number of stories about the revelation that there are spies embedded within the employee base in Twitter, right? So at that point, there's a backdoor to everything. Everything becomes potentially inauthentic if it's the actual system administrators that have been hacked, right? So the idea that social media is immune to intelligence influence, I think, would be naive. I think actually quite the contrary. It was probably a massive sort of area of activity. And Elon Musk, I mean, who knows if he's not, an operative for someone or other. I mean, we don't know who he's, he has a lot of contracts with a lot of homeland, not homeland defense, but like the NASA and I guess to some degree, the military. I mean, it is not inconceivable to me that Elon also is a little bit compromised on that area, but certainly there is going to be a shift in terms of the power balance, in terms of which intelligence agencies are controlling these things, I would imagine. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah. I mean, well, and the other thing is journalists, I think people don't realize that they are supposed to be the citizens' intelligence agency. And to your point earlier about like journalists getting these cryptic emails from corporations or intelligence or whatever, like if you're a good actor in journalism, but you're naive, it becomes very obvious to me that those types of emails are going to lead you to become a giant conspiracy theorist. And they will derail your ability to view the world in a rational light, which is really interesting. They can kind of
ruin you as a
journalist. Yeah, well, Isabella's a great example of this. So
I'm ruined now.
Well, no, it's true. It's true though. I mean, like, you know this as well as I do that journalists are at their heart conspiracists. Like many are. And the question is to what degree can you maintain your sanity?
Definitely the case. I think that's definitely the case. Like people go into journalism for two main reasons, either because they're passionate about exposing truth and they what I would describe as passionate about the stories, or they go into it for self-aggrandizing purposes, to be a big commentator and have a public opinion about things. So those are the two types of journalists I think that are out there, and certainly the former is the one that I would more identify with. And you can always tell, you've got an orange.
Yeah, I don't know what happened there. I tried something.
It's infiltration by the Chinese, maybe, into this podcast. I identify with the former. Oh, he's gone. He's gone entirely.
I'm still here. I'm just orange apparently now. Oh, we're back. Okay.
You're back. There's some gremlins in the system. But yeah, so I think you either identify as one or the other. And if you identify as the former, you are naturally going to be skeptical about everything. And if you are naturally skeptical about everything, you do tend towards a bit of conspiratorial thinking. It's about grounding yourself. Now, when you see your own system being compromised, and it has been compromised, like even before 2016, click accounting in journalism was already debasing the product, because you had a completely different mechanism for valuing the content that was being produced. And so everything went for, it was a race to the bottom in terms of click count, in terms of attention, in terms of puerile headlines, just to grab, as many clicks as possible. This was already happening. We were already being led by these very sinister forces before 2016 and the new, fake news environment came about. And for anyone who was serious about journalism and serious about quality journalism, it was already a big problem, because there was no time for it. And I think with investigations, this is my last point, I promise, investigations are a bit like VC investing, right? For every 10 investigations, you're going to do it properly. You have to have the capital to be prepared for 9 of those 10 to go nowhere, right? If you're going to do really good investigations, 9 out of 10 are going to be dead ends. You'll investigate, and you'll realize actually there's nothing here. And you have to be prepared as a media institution to give up on that story and not push it for profit, or for commercial reasons, right? Unfortunately, that never happened because money is so tight. There is no slack in the system to allow for wrong takes or wrong pathways. So you commit, as soon as you've overcommitted to an investigation, there's this pressure to deliver a story no matter what. And that in itself creates fake news, because people then tweak the story just to get it out there, just to make sure the reporter didn't waste their time. And I think that is a problem as well. So a really good investigation, it's usually the product of 10 investigations that never went anywhere, if that makes sense.
And it's incredibly expensive. Like, I think that needs to be noted. Like, journalism has really like changed its business model, and the reason a lot of this has moved to short form journalism that doesn't have a lot of investigative need is because investigative journalism is utterly. I mean, think about it. Like, how many people were on the Wirecard case? How many?
In the end, well, with lawyers, it was at least a team of 8. At least 8 or 10.
And on average, their salary is probably $150K. And how long did it take? A year and a half? 2 years?
Oh, it's longer. It started, I think, in 2015 or something. Yeah.
So that's at the very minimum, like a $3 million story.
Mm-hmm.
And that's incredible. Like, I mean, how much money did that bring to the FT? As a story itself, it brought very, very little. But like, as like
huge risk,
the
huge
FT,
legal costs.
Huge legal costs. They got sued, I'm sure. And the FT, the reason that the FT has subscribers who pay them money is because like the body of work that exists. That's the idea. But like the story as an individual story never pays for itself. I mean, my guess is the FT probably spent upwards of $5 to $10 million defending that story and paying.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. It was
very expensive. That's crazy. Yeah. And maybe this Netflix documentary will pay off a little bit, but like, I don't know. Like, these stories are crazy and they're very expensive, and that's why journalism as an investigative institution is being abandoned on the whole.
So, what that leaves us with how we, let's not drain everybody's life source for too long. I'm optimistic that we can change things around. And I do think that if Elon is successful, I think there is an opportunity for what I would call networks, value-aligned networks, to appear on Twitter in a way where people understand the values of the groups. They're self-declared, that they will self-regulate themselves. And this is very smart, because cost of regulation and cost of moderation is really high. You have to have humans doing it. What Twitter did before is that they thought algorithms could do that job, but algorithms cannot do this job, because this is ultimately a human perception thing. You can't outsource it to there is too much subjectivity for a algorithm to do this job. That said, by getting people to pay for verification, I do think that there is Elon is leaning in some ways on KYC that already goes through the banking sector, because just by getting people to pay for it with a credit card, that bank has done some KYC on the person paying for it. Yes,
I disagree with that, because obviously to pay the $8 a month, it's very, very easy for a state like China to just pay and create loads of different accounts.
Yeah, but it's Sybil attack. Like, the difference is right now they can create 1 billion accounts at zero cost, whereas in the case of paying $8, 1 billion accounts is going to cost them $8 billion. So it's a very and in which case that money flows right into America. It's great.
Yes, exactly.
It flows right into Elon, not necessarily America.
Well, he's going to spend it here. He'll buy.
Well, no,
he'll buy Facebook.
No, his whole plan is to share the proceeds, right, with content creators. So it would be us being paid to create anti-China content, effectively as well. It's not a bad model, and
it isn't. It's just I don't trust Elon to do it. That's all.
There is not a perfect system.
I think that's super reasonable, by the way, Frankfurter.
I don't trust Elon either, but as far as I can see, I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt until it all goes pear-shaped. And it might go pear-shaped, but certainly having a friction like this is going to improve on things. And you are leaning into KYC, because I do think it's hard. It's not like one, if it's identity based, it could, I don't know how he's going to do this, but he could easily insist that, it's one user per, you can't replicate the same, you can't do mass mass verifications. But then, of course, corporates would probably do mass.
But Isabel, why would he care about that? Like, let people do like 30 or 40. Like they're just paying him money. Like the beauty is that there's only a limited amount of money. So in Bitcoin, Frank, you know this well, I'm sure. Like essentially, what the Byzantine generals problem solves, the burning of energy, is a Sybil attack problem. So this is called a Sybil attack. And if you want to stop a Sybil attack problem, you just make the cost of Sybil attacking egregiously expensive. So if right now the cost of Russia, I mean, this is what's so funny. It's so obvious that this is the answer, right? If Russia can make a billion bots that influence the election on Twitter for free and it's costless, then the solution is to not make it costless. And the fact that Twitter never made it not costless tells me that there's a reason that they didn't fix the simple problem of Sybil attack. Why?
Yeah.
Are we doing this? Is this a method we use in the United States against others? I mean, is there a reason Twitter doesn't want to stop Sybil attacks with the creation of bots? What is it? Because if
I would say it's not just about the
costless-
US. Imagine how many bots are used to influence elections abroad by us.
If Sybil attacks are costless to produce, you will get Sybil attacked. It's very obvious, and it seems to me that it's very problematic. And there's a big question in my mind as to why Twitter, knowing, because I knew this was the problem. If Twitter knew this was a problem, why is it that they didn't solve it just by charging, I don't know, $1 an account to stop the Sybil attacks? They didn't do it. There's a reason. And I think that would be a great question for a journalist to figure out, because it's obvious that would have solved a lot of problems. Were they getting payment from the government to not do that? I would like to know.
But do you think that maybe there is an interest or a mentality of in all these social media companies that the more you allow for, hate speech and hate bots, let's call them hate bots for lack of a better word, but by inciting this division, this hatred, that hence increasing the traffic, the old mentality was that's good for us. So let's not put restrictions by trying to put the money in. So I think what you're saying is correct. It is a good idea to do this, and what Elon is doing to try and reduce this. And I think the old guard thought, actually, no, we don't want to do this because we want to increase the amount of traffic.
But the evidence isn't there, because if they wanted to keep hate speech on the platform for traffic, they would have kept the people who they claimed were most guilty of it on the platform. Alex Jones was great for traffic.
Yeah,
why did they kick him off? They kicked him off because he was these have been politically motivated reasons for kicking people off.
But I agree. But I'm wondering how much extra traffic came on Twitter with people outraged that Alex Jones got kicked out.
But it would have been temporary. You're talking about like a month of temporary traffic.
Yeah,
I don't think that. Yeah, I agree with Josh. I think there's something else going on here, and I think it's to do with certain political motivations.
I think it might have to do with selling information of users to people that are paying a lot of money to see it. Like when this is the whole thing. Someone made the point, and Eric Voorhees in Bitcoin, I think, made this point right after Elon acquired it. He said, "Remember, if you're paying $8, you are no longer the product; you are the customer." And that's actually a really astute point. Like we have always been in these social media things with regard to content creation. Our content creation makes us the target. We are the thing being sold. It is our content, our information that these companies have used to make money. And the presumption has been that because they were released as free, nobody would ever pay for them, and that the base cost of them is free. But we all know that's not the case. The base cost is somewhere. It's not $0. And we know that because if someone's willing to pay, that means that these accounts have value. Well, they might have value to an advertiser or a government that isn't your government. They might have value for all sorts of, they might have value to Twitter. But, another person they might have value to is me, right? And if I value it at a cost that is above what governments will pay to see my information or what advertisers will pay to get my information, then it seems to me that the better model is for them to charge me the goddamn fee. And if you want to be the product, then you have a choice. You can opt into being the product by saying, I'm not going to pay. It's really simple. Really, really simple.
So you don't think that he's going to carry on?
I agree. And
normal operations of selling you as a product and charging you $8?
I don't trust Elon as far as I can throw him, but what I can tell you is that once we start charging for content, which is what needs to happen, right? As soon as we can actually charge for content, rather than bifurcating these business models where YouTube is, for example, taking your information and doing whatever they want with it, right? And then you get paid for the account by Patreon or something, right? Like rather than bifurcating all of these business models, allow them to be combined and give me sort of a net value of what this thing is worth and allow me to pay for my information not to be leaked. You know, Rumble's a good example of this. If you want, you can go on Rumble. You can pay them $1,000 a month and they'll host your video. Why can't I pay YouTube? YouTube is the biggest asset to numerous companies in the United States. Without YouTube, many companies don't exist. They're the biggest resource. They host millions of megabytes of bandwidth worth of video, billions. And yet, I can't pay them to host when I would be glad to do it if what happened is my stuff was locked away and not shared. In fact, I do pay Rumble.
Sorry, I don't follow what you mean.
I can't pay YouTube
to
not share my stuff.
To YouTube, not share.
Here's the thing. There's a situation. Thousands and millions of companies in particular, but even individuals that like are on YouTube, they want to pay YouTube to host their content, right? They would be willing to do it. Maybe you can continue with the advertising stuff and like, you know, the amount that you owe YouTube based on how much you upload would be, you know, withdrawn from that and YouTube could still share revenue. But there's lots of us who don't have like advertisements that would pay for the bandwidth that's used on our accounts, right? But the account material is very valuable. There are millions of people that would pay $100 to $10,000 a month based on whatever the use and the bandwidth and the storage is on YouTube, and you cannot pay them. Why is that the case with these social media companies? Why do none of them have the option to pay? And I think that's a really important question that no one has answered.
Well, this is the heart of my privatization of the means of production theory, which is that we're living in an era of two-sided markets. What you're describing is the ecosystem model where you're the product because the real client is somebody else and you are the product being sold to them. And this is, you know, the classic real world example of this is nightclubs where, you know, girls come in for free because they are the cattle being serviced to the men who pay to get in. That's the other example, right? And we have been living in this subsidized utopia for a long time. It's given us a false impression of the cost of these services. So most people think that email, you know, YouTube, Twitter, social media, all of this, it's free. They don't have to pay a penny for it. It's an idealistic communist utopia where everything is free. But it's not free because these things have a real world value. The value that has been entirely obscured. And what Elon is trying to do is basically what I've likened to perestroika of the internet, to reform the internet so there is more clarity about the true costs. Now, the compelling reason to do that is, by the way, the inflationary environment and the higher energy costs that we're facing. Because in this scenario, eventually, you, the product, are not going to be the equilibrium that was established is going to break down either way. There's going to have to be a surcharge applied at some point because the costings are now out of control, even for the big tech companies that used to make a lot of money out of these arrangements. Because when in times of scarcity and need, advertisers are not as you know, successful in their endeavors because people make better decisions in terms of how they have less money to spend, so they prioritize on essential items. So all that discretionary spending that advertisers go for is increasingly, you know, harder to influence because you are going to be price You're going to be focused on price rather than quality or brand loyalty or whatever, right? So they're all up against it. And I think Elon has come in, and whether it's a coincidence, it could be a coincidence, but it might also be indicative of harder times to come. And Twitter, unlike all the other companies, was never raking it in from advertisers. Their profits, their operating profits have been incredibly below
I think
par.
they've only been profitable for 2 of their 15 operating years. So, and they weren't even recent years. They were the last.
And that to me has created a situation where the management of Twitter before Elon came along was not in the oligarchic realms, right? They were, because you see, there's such a concept as fuck off money. Excuse my language. You're so rich, you can tell people to fuck off, right? And that is the case of the Googles, the Apples, the Amazons. There's so much competition to advertise on their space that they're making shitloads, so they're not in a position to be dictated to by advertisers, right? Because there is a competition for their ad space. But in Twitter, that was never the case. And so Twitter management was never in a position to say bugger off to the advertisers. That actually gave advertisers a lot more power over the management than in any other social media platform. And I think there's probably an untold story as to why. I don't know what it is. But as we come into a perestroika moment where we get a reformation of the system, and like you said right at the beginning, Josh, Elon is telling the advertisers, well, through his manipulative shenanigans, he's basically created a justification for getting rid of the advertisers and displacing them with now a subscription fee. And
which by the way, Isabella, will bring the advertisers back.
I totally agree.
So there is a misconstruence here. I hear this all the time from people that the advertisers care about bots. The advertisers don't care about bots, people. They do not care. Do you know why? Because when you buy ads, you're buying them to the degree that they continue to make you money. Okay? So if you get rid of bots, all that does is raise the price, and it shows your ads to the same number of real people for the same price. So there's no difference between a non-botted platform and a botted platform for advertisers. So all of their complaints are BS. That they do not care about bots. The bots are a problem probably for discourse, but not for advertisers.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. So and where we are going to end up, I think, is a situation where a lot of people will refuse to take the blue check mark or to pay for the service. Then there will be a small rabble of people who do. I don't think it's going to be that many. I think more people will reject it. Really?
I think you're wrong. Yes, and you know why?
Why?
Because it's obvious to me that Elon is about to flip this on its head. What's going to happen is if you don't do a blue check mark, you are going to self-censor. He's going to start giving people the option to be verified. Maybe he'll give a $2 option, so you get a red check mark, right? But you'll have the option to put in your feed only people that are verified very quickly. And so you very quickly are going to be the equivalent of self-shadow banned if you don't do this, which is totally fine. It's a reasonable way that if you are not going to prove that you're a real person, then I don't have to listen to you. And if you are a real person, then I can finally make a comment, and the engagement on your comment and my comment are going to be very high engagement, right? Versus after Twitter fired all of those employees, the number one trend on Twitter for a short period was people saying, I just got fired from Twitter. I was the guy who, if you said you were gay, showed you nothing but gay content. They were just saying ridiculous things about their job at Twitter, which they didn't have. And I couldn't verify who was real and who wasn't. There was literally no way for me to know who actually got fired from Twitter in that group of people. And not that, this would actually be, at least these people would be real. I would know that.
I still dispute this issue of the blue take just going to be real people. I think it's going to be absolutely gamed, and we're going to get for the next couple of months. And I have to emphasize,
certainly right.
Look, I have to emphasize, I literally do not use Twitter. I have my account since 2012. I've tweeted 20 times, and that's just me to complain because my flights have been cancelled or some bad customer service at Coinbase back in the 2018 when they wouldn't give me my money.
Frank, you're certainly right. There will be a lot of fake stuff on Twitter, but the question is whether it's going to like right now. I don't know if you ever heard of the dead internet theory. The idea is that the internet died and everything is bots now. So like when you're engaging on social media in an angry conversation, basically what you're doing is you're fighting with bots.
Okay. Yep.
And that's probably true. I mean, I see this all the time on Reddit on particularly hot button debates like gun control in the United States. That's a really common one. It's literally nothing but bots in these systems. And they go on and they just make the people who think one thing really angry. And they say things that are just, angering to like people that maybe know something or know a little bit more than the other side. And so they'll level these tropes, and it's very clearly like sort of bot farming. Like I watch it and there'll be pile-ons, they'll get in fights. It'll be, and that's what they do. So like if we can actually get rid of these bots or at least make it costly,
it's the bots that are the problem, because like if I choose to pay $8 to create a parody account of like a Twitter employee that's just been fired, there's only so much scale in that, right? There's only so much. I'm not going to do, and if it's funny, if it's a parody, whatever, fine. I don't think you're going to solve, like I've always said, I don't think you'll solve all the problems, but just by adding a cost to it, you're going to make a better parody account because people are going to be more committed to it. How many people start parody accounts?
It's probably going to have a mark that says parody account, by the way. They're probably not going to verify you on a parody account. They're just going to mark it like verified parody account.
I think also there's an element of like what we're trying to do with inscribers, which is just you self-identify as X, Y, Z, and it's up to the community to see if you can be held to account by those values that you present. And by the way, I don't know if this is an Elon innovation, but this sudden like community context thing that he's giving to some of the tweets. I don't know if you saw one of the White House tweets got, rather than being fact checked, it was community contexted. Did you see that? Yes. It was something to do with I think pensions, or I'm not sure.
You're talking about the Biden administration one?
Yes, and it got.
Yeah, so what happened? What happened is the Biden administration tried to say, "Look at what we've done. We've given the biggest COLA. We've given the biggest rise in Social Security benefits ever in the history of the Social Security program." And the fact check said the reason that this is actually happening is it's automatic. It's been automatic since Nixon, and it's because inflation is astounding. So basically, he was taking credit for inflation.
Yeah, but what's interesting,
which is probably illegal.
But what's fascinating for me is that just retitling it community context makes me less allergic to it, because when you see a fact check, makes me immediately very allergic to it. I immediately go, oh, this is a subjective view from another party. But community context, it is more like
thinks this.
Yeah.
That's what I agree.
It's a subtle word change, but I think it makes a really big difference, because it's not saying you have to believe it. It's just like, hey, there's just a few other facts
that you might want to deleting a tweet is the destruction of government property.
And are you
the same thing they're going after Trump for right now? I just want to point that out.
But anyway, on that cheery note, I think we've covered a lot of bases. Frank, we didn't really get to talk about inscribers as much, but I think it sets a foundation for what we can refer back to this conversation as we go forward, because our plan really is to do like more frequent surgeries, hopefully inviting more and more journalists to come and join us, so we can discuss as a group what the problems are and sort of awaken the larger journalistic community to the real problems in the industry. So
why don't you talk a little bit about inscribers? I'm just sitting here loading ammo anyways. So
okay. As you do. Josh likes his ammo. Josh, why don't you ask me some key pointed questions, and then me and Frank and we can very quick fire, hopefully in the next
the ammo. No, I'm kidding. What is inscribers?
Okay. I'll try that one. Inscribers is a community network for journalists, professional journalists, to group together under shared values and to gain efficiencies from sharing resources where they can.
And did you guys start this?
Well, start is a optimistic way.
So
We're trying to
Are
start
you
it.
are you starting? I'll use the present progressive. Are
we're
you starting this?
we're architecting. So what we're trying to do is, obviously, Isabella is the great Isabella journalist, and I'm trying to bring a technical and sort of operational solution to allow journalists to operate independently, but more importantly, to do what Isabella was just saying, is to create an environment where there is this element of, should we say, self-checking, the self-policing, to allow the reader, from a perspective of the reader, to be able to get different points of view. And this goes back to what I was saying about the having multiple sources of information, but from sources that you can verify, sources that you can follow. And
Everything, it's cumulative, right? There is no,
Yeah.
our philosophy is very simple. It's not left or right, black or white. It's cumulative. So one of the ideas behind what influenced me is nanny apps, which you will, probably both of you don't use because you don't have a small one. But the concept is that when you are when you are recruiting a nanny or bringing in a babysitter, a total stranger to your house, right? You have, how do you know they're not a mad person who's about to kill your baby or run off with all your stuff, right? So you have there's an app called Bubble, and I spoke to the CEO of it because I really do think there are lots of shared aspects for nannies and for journalists. It's you're asking the client to trust you implicitly, and a nanny can only provide references. She can only there are things called DBS checks, which are like crime checks, like whether you're on the criminal record, whether you have a criminal record. You can add sort of certificates that you've done, like certain courses, etc., etc. So you can have a whole
don't do crime as a nanny class.
Exactly, don't do crime. And no, there isn't one solution. You're not, as a parent, you're not going to go, well, this is definitely going to prove that this nanny is trustworthy. But it's a kind of cumulative amount of different varying amounts of data and stuff that they self present that makes you make a decision about which one you will or will not hire. And there are lots of different aspects, how much experience they've had, how expensive they are. All of this is taken into consideration. And journalism is no different. There are like young journalists, there are more professional journalists, both have pluses and minuses. And I think we need to create a network where journalists are being very transparent about their experience, about what their affiliations are, about what their objectives are, because you're asking readers to trust you. And that is as important as it's as big a deal as parents, as nannies, asking parents to trust them. I don't see it as being any different.
And like, what's the difference between something like this and a Substack?
Good question. The Substack is entirely open-ended, which means anyone can write on it. Whereas what we want to do is a professional network. So you can't just, like you, Josh, would not qualify, frankly.
I'm a journalist. What? Look at me asking questions.
No, so there exactly.
But Josh, you could be invited in the sense of
Frank disagrees.
No, but that's the point of the platform, is exactly to allow for this, because basically, I'm not a professional journalist, but I assume I was, and I know you, Josh, and you're doing an investigation or a piece or something or whatever. I would endorse your entrance, which basically means that in a kind of way, I am putting my reputation on the line.
Thanks, Frank.
To bring you in. Well, and you'd come in, but then that means that my user base of people that trust me and everything say, "Oh well, Frank, you brought in this new guy, Josh. So let
He's
me
a
read
total
Josh.
nutter. What were you thinking?
Yeah. but that's what I'm saying is it's also creating a sort of a daisy chain of
Frank lets in
accountability.
Junseth lets in David Icke, Alex Jones, all the true journalists.
But why? Listen, you know, that's the whole point. You know, even if we're different in opinion or whatever, as a professional, I would recognize your professionalism in what you're writing, and even if what you're writing is something that I don't agree with, but I think it's good quality journalism, I'll bring you in and say, look at this different point of view.
And then is it a Substack, or is it just reviews and ratings of journalists?
It is a publishing platform as well as aggregating external material and being able to rate external material.
It's not just a publishing, like eventually it's what I think in the industry is now being termed as a potential super app, because journalists need all sorts of services. So as an independent, you lose on a whole bunch of scaled up resources that you have in a mainstream outlet. So from office space.
We don't do buzzwords on this show, so super app is not allowed. Okay.
No super app.
We're true journalists here. We don't do buzzwords.
We're gonna call it a hyper mega app.
Ultra mega
app. Ultra mega app. I love that. Not politically correct.
I'll do what I can to turn it into that, Isabella, when Frank lets me on.
But think about it. Like, so there are all these scaled up things that you lose out on, from insurance, legal services, access to archives, third party, services. I mean, loads, office space, everything. As an independent, you have to pay for all that by yourself. Now, what we're proposing is that people can club together like lawyers do in chambers, where if you are part of a group of journalists who share the same values, you have no problem in sharing these specific resources together. You remain an autonomous agent. So you're benefiting from the scaling, but no one has any say on your content apart from the views that you collectively agree to.
Isabella, let me recommend something just as an idea. I don't know, maybe this is stupid, but I'm ideating here. I'm ideating. All right.
No, but you
should let journalists form these groups within the app that you maybe call a company, and then when they do that, they could kick each other out, which you could have a button on there for maybe the guy who's the head of this group. The button would be fire, and you could remove people from them, and then as this company, they could buy the insurance as a whole.
Yeah, it is basically.
I actually don't think that's a bad idea. If you were able to basically have them associate with the people that they trust, and they could actually form essentially a journal on this app. That'd be pretty cool.
It is de facto button, but journalists are the worst. They don't have any commercial acumen whatsoever, right?
So they are.
And when you
I'll be the head of the company.
Thank you, Frank.
I'll be the CEO. I'll be the CEO of all the companies on this app. Don't worry, Frank.
But the problem is, when the existing company structures are all corrupt and potentially not doing their job, right? You have to encourage independence. It is a bit like Atlas Shrugged, in that everyone has to leave and start again from the beginning, right? And they're not going to do that. No one's going to found a company, or people will try, we're trying. I'm trying with the blind spot. But by and large, journalists will be freelancers, or they will operate as independents, right? And they will not see the benefit of clubbing together as a more sort of holistic, value-led organization until 10 years from now, right? But we're trying to accelerate that, and we're doing it through partnership, which means that the individual voice within those networks is at least protected, this is not the case in a company right now, in a media company right now. That is the problem. There isn't any shared value. In fact, the values are completely distorted. So if you read the Washington Post or the New York Times or the Financial Times or the BBC or the Guardian, right? You as a reader are buying those publications based on some assumption of values, right? The masthead values of those papers, Guardian being left-leaning, Telegraph being right-leaning. But that's not the case in terms of the people they've been hiring over the last 10 years do not reflect the values of those papers, right? So the values have been detached from the values of those working on the papers. And that is why there is a complete confusion of narrative, because there are internal insurrections that regarding certain things being published. There are internal lobbying groups. It's not.
Was it Barry Weiss who talks about this at the NYT? Was that who wrote about
Well,
that?
exactly. And so what you need to do is, it is reinventing the wheel. I'm not going to pretend it isn't. It really is. But it needs, every now and then you have to reinvent the wheel, because the old system has become so detached from the core values. You have to build from the bottom up and align people properly. It's like in sports, right? You have to, when you're picking teams, and you have to like reconfigure the teams every now and then, because people get old. They don't get very, you have to refresh, right? And we no longer can rely on the human resources departments at media companies to do it, because the human resources departments are choosing people for completely weird and unknown reasons that have
Isabel,
nothing to do.
how do you solve the problem in media of the removal of editors that occurred back in early 2000s?
Well, in our one, well, everything is based on self-declaration. So if your community decides that you are no longer publishing to the values of your prescribed network, you go off and you join the one that you can, that does reflect your values. Because the difference here is it's entirely open-ended. So if I don't share the values of any of the existing networks, I think they're going wrong, I just start a new network and hope people will join me, because I think my values are better than everybody else's. So it's a competition of values and different respective networks. There's no censorship. The platform is not going to dictate its own community values on anyone. The minimum policing we do is whatever the law requires, right?
And what about anonymity?
Well, anonymity is fine as long as the anonymous source is known to someone in the network and somebody endorses them. Again, it's like with the nannies. If you are anonymous, you might have to provide additional forms of ID or different types of additional proof, right? But you can still operate anonymously, because you
mean as a journalist?
As a journalist, I think that's really important.
Yeah, but even as a journalist, you can operate anonymously. So if you've got, for example, journalists operating out of, let's say, Egypt or the Middle East, and you have to operate anonymously, to your stuff, but you're known to a journalist in the US or in the UK, they can say, anonymous journalist X is real, and I have
a hard-hitting question. All right.
Okay.
Given that the UK doesn't have free speech, how do two people from the UK plan on operating this?
I'm Italian, she's Polish. There you go.
Italy and Poland also don't have free speach.
You see, I have an inspiration. I mean, from Italy. There's a Sicilian journalist who started. His name is Pino.
Godfather.
No, Pino Maniaci.
Oh.
Pino Maniaci in Palermo. He started his own little TV station, and he was totally anti-mafia. Naturally, his life wasn't very pleasant, but all the mainstream media basically called him a nutter, because obviously they are,
in bed with the mafia.
They're not going to do it, and he persevered in everything. Now, the troubles he run in are things like, legal fees, getting killed, so protection. The costs the man had were enormous to run this little TV station, and he would do local news stories in Sicily where the mafia would do things that protect racketeering or whatever it might be, and he was doing it on his own. I imagine if he had a platform like Inscribers to work on, there'll be others, who are placed in other areas of Sicily that could join that, and then they could pull together the resources.
But here's my question, and it really does come down to like a legal appeal. So, for example, in the UK, if you start reporting on a court trial, it is required that you follow the entire court trial through and through, right? In the U.S., that's
It's
not the case.
It's best practice.
Well, isn't it law?
It is
in the UK.
best
It's
practice.
law.
It is and it isn't. Like it is law. It is. You run the risk of creating the risk is that you misrepresent what's going on, right? And then you fall what it's called you have a kind of contempt of court situation because you have indirectly influenced the trial by not reporting on a key factor. But it's not the law per se that you have to do it. It's just that if you don't do it, you run the risk of being de facto in contempt of court by.
So I guess what I would say is, like, the U.S. doesn't have this rule. I think it's actually a really good rule in terms of journalistic best practice. But what do you do when someone doesn't do that, misconveys something, or the government feels as though they've misconveyed something, and then you get a subpoena in the UK for that journalist who's maybe anonymous?
Well, that's the whole point. Like the network, it's like a union. So there would be a pot in the shared. If you are a inscriber guild that is focused on court reporting, you would essentially build your entire group around the costs and risks around doing so. So you would have a really great professional network of court reporters who understood that, they would share expertise and they would focus entirely on doing a great job on court reporting. And you would be able to trust them because these people are experts in their field. And they would have it all nailed in terms of like insurance and legal.
So I like this. So the idea is like guilds. You're gonna like create guilds around these. I think that's a very good idea. Very, very cool.
And it can be anything. So you can have a guild of like technology reporters, or you can have a guild of polymaths, like, who are generalists, because it doesn't work just on quality in terms of this is the best practice here. It's also like we are merely speculative reporters, so don't trust us on anything else, or we are mainly entertainment. Or you could even have complete PRs. Like there's no limitation in that sense. It's just that like with any financial product, I was very much inspired by Bitcoin in this thinking, Josh, because it's about a transparent Ponzi scheme. Like it's not risky if you know what you're getting. If the guild pre-declares how they're going to screw you, if they pre-declare, well, we are effectively shilling loads of, advertorials and travel, and we're going on jollies, they're sending us all over the world to write about hotels, but we're pretty much corrupt. That's fine. At least you as the reader go in with your eyes open. That's what matters, right? But you're competing with others who might have different values.
But there's also the other element is because you are in this community platform of professionals. If one guild starts doing things that are not, above board or whatever behaving, it gets called out by other industry professionals. So, so you as the reader might, look at an article by a guild that is obviously clearly being paid for, let's assume by Pfizer, to advocate whatever
whatever the guild's rules are. Like that.
Will you be charging $7.99 a month to get on this platform?
Probably
$8.
Well, probably. Why not?
And I think that's it for me. And I see a comment here. Mumbling Bearded Freak says, even if you don't have a guest, I would love to hear a back and forth with just you and Junseth. You, I assume, means Frank. So me and Frank are going to do this weekly. Isabella, you're welcome to join us if you want. So mumbling Bearded Frank, I think that we are probably going to start moving these to weekly. Although this coming week's going to be hard, but I will figure it out. I promise.
We've done this week already, so I'm traveling. Yeah. This is my last travel week.
This week. This is Sunday. You're right. This is this week. Good. Nice, Isabella.
We've done this week. And that's why we did it on the Sunday.
Screw you, mumbling Bearded Freak.
But we will be back as of next week. I'm not traveling anymore. I'm going to be back on it, and I will be more read in than ever before. Yeah. So we're going to be doing these regularly.
Subscribe to the channel. We need more subs so that we can ask you to pay us money for your comments.
We don't get corrupted. Because the last point, and I think we'll finish it on that, is that remember, journalists are only not corrupt if you pay for them.
If they're me.
It's really important. It's a really important point. If you're not paying for journalists, it's annoying, but it's so true. So they need to be able to make their own way. Otherwise, who else is paying them?
All right. So this, I'm going to do my sign off. This is Junseth checking up the Deuce of the South. The mass has ended. Go in peace. St. Catherine, pray for us.
What do I say? Toodaloo?
Toodaloo.
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 Isn't that
Nice
the
one,
bathroom in the UK?
That's to the loo.
That's what you said, right?
I said toodaloo.
Oh.
Toodaloo. It's a
Toodaloo.
phrase.
It's a phrase.
I'll say dobranoc, everybody, which means good night. Take care. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back.
All right, guys. Thank you very much.